If you're serious about understanding where XRP is heading, not just the hype, but the real structural shifts happening behind the scenes, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because what we're about to talk about today, this one feels different. Something just happened. And suddenly, one number is everywhere. 5,000 XRP. Now look, when a specific number starts circulating across investor circles, private chats, crypto Twitter threads, and analyst breakdowns, that's not random. Numbers trend for a reason. And this one? It's tied to what insiders are describing as a newly locked-in XRP-linked deal. Before we go any further, let's stay grounded. We are not talking about an officially published "you must hold 5,000 XRP" rule. That does not exist. Anyone claiming that is speculating. But here's where things get interesting. In institutional finance, benchmark thresholds are common. When companies integrate new settlement rails, they test in blocks. They test in scalable units. They don't experiment with tiny amounts. They simulate real-world volume. They simulate stress conditions. They simulate commercial flow. And when reports start surfacing that certain XRP liquidity tests are clustering around consistent operational blocks, investors start connecting dots. So check this out. If a major payment corridor is being structured to use XRP as a bridge asset, the institutions involved would need to evaluate liquidity depth. They would measure slippage. They would measure speed. They would measure reliability under volume. That doesn't happen with 25 XRP. That happens with size. Now imagine a scenario where 5,000 XRP becomes a repeatable testing unit. Not because it's magical. Not because it's secret law. But because it represents meaningful liquidity without being operationally extreme. At current valuations, 5,000 XRP is large enough to simulate commercial usage, but small enough to scale repeatedly across multiple corridors. And that's where the psychology kicks in. Retail investors are looking at that number and thinking, is that the benchmark institutions are quietly preparing around? Again, speculation. But speculation often begins where patterns appear. Let's zoom out for a second. Ripple's long-term strategy has never been retail hype. It's been infrastructure, enterprise partnerships, cross-border efficiency, regulatory navigation. They've spent years building during quiet markets, years fighting regulatory battles, years forming international relationships while headlines focused elsewhere. And now, we are in a phase where global payment systems are under pressure. Traditional correspondent banking is slow, expensive, fragmented. Central banks are experimenting with digital currencies. Governments are openly discussing settlement modernization. In that environment, a bridge asset that can settle in seconds becomes extremely attractive if liquidity is reliable. And reliability requires depth. Depth requires participants. Participants require exposure. So when whispers circulate that a major deal is locked in, and that liquidity staging discussions reference specific XRP quantities, the market pays attention. Because this is how institutional integration often unfolds. First, pilot programs. Then corridor testing. Then limited deployment. Then scaling. And by the time retail investors fully understand what's happening, positioning has already occurred. Let me ask you something. If you were a payment provider testing XRP between, say, two major economic regions, would you announce every internal benchmark publicly? Of course not. You would structure quietly. You would measure quietly. You would optimize quietly. Then when everything works smoothly, you'd expand. That's how infrastructure evolves. And infrastructure plays are different from hype plays. They don't explode overnight for no reason. They build pressure. Then they reprice. Now here's the psychological layer that makes this fascinating. 5,000 XRP is attainable for serious retail investors. It's not pocket change, but it's not institution-only territory either. It sits in that middle ground where it feels meaningful. And markets are driven by meaning. When enough participants believe a number represents serious positioning, accumulation patterns can subtly shift. Not because of guarantees, but because of perceived preparedness. And preparedness in emerging markets can be powerful. Let's also talk about supply dynamics. XRP has a fixed maximum supply. That's not changing. If institutional corridors begin requiring consistent liquidity staging, and multiple entities allocate operational reserves, Circulating supply tightens. Tight supply combined with functional demand changes price behavior over time. Not instantly, but structurally. That's the key difference. Short-term volatility is noise. Structural demand is signal. And what is people buzzing right now is the possibility that structural demand is quietly forming. Now I want to be responsible here. Deals can stall. Pilot programs can fail. Macro conditions can derail momentum. We are not declaring inevitability, but we are observing alignment. Regulatory tone has softened compared to previous years. Institutional interest in digital settlement has increased. Liquidity technology has matured. And Ripple continues expanding globally, especially outside the United States. That combination matters, because when infrastructure narratives shift from theoretical to operational, valuation models change. Investors stop asking if and start asking how much. That's when repricing cycles begin. And that's why conversations like this feel intense. Because 5000 XRP isn't about superstition. It's about signal detection. It's about reading between the lines of enterprise behavior. It's about recognizing that when major players lock in back-end integrations, retail awareness lags. And by the time public announcements hit mainstream headlines, early positioning windows may already be narrowing. History shows this pattern repeatedly in emerging technologies. Early skepticism, quiet enterprise trials, underreported integrations, then sudden mainstream realization. Those who understood the infrastructure narrative early benefited the most. Again, not financial advice, just pattern recognition. Now let's consider the opposite scenario. What if 5000 XRP is nothing more than a coincidental cluster size used in isolated testing? Then the number fades, the market adjusts, and we move on. That's the risk side. Serious investors must weigh both sides. But the reason this conversation has traction is because it aligns with broader macro shifts. Global payment modernization is not slowing down. Digital asset settlement discussions are not disappearing. Enterprise blockchain exploration is accelerating, not reversing. So when a digital asset specifically designed for cross-border efficiency appears in the center of a newly locked-in deal, people pay attention. And they should. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but analytically. Look at liquidity patterns. Look at on-chain behavior. Look at institutional commentary trends. Watch what changes, not what's shouted. Because markets whisper before they scream. And right now, there's a whisper building around XRP infrastructure expansion. Whether 5000 XRP becomes a lasting symbolic benchmark or simply a temporary discussion point remains to be seen. But what cannot be ignored is this: enterprise alignment is more important than retail hype. Operational depth is more important than viral tweets. And if this newly secured deal expands XRP's role in real-world settlement flows, the long-term implications are far more significant than short-term chart candles. That's what serious holders are watching. Not tomorrow's price, but next year's integration footprint. And if you're still here, you're not just chasing noise, you're studying structure. That's exactly why this channel exists. We break down signals before they become headlines. We analyze patterns before they become trends. So if you want to stay ahead of the next shift, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. Because developments in this space don't arrive politely. They hit fast. And when they do, preparation matters. 5000 XRP may not be destiny. It may not be prophecy. But it might represent something deeper. A glimpse into how institutions are quietly staging for a digital settlement era that's no longer theoretical. Watch carefully. Stay rational. And remember, in infrastructure plays, the biggest moves often begin long before the crowd realizes the foundation has already been poured. We'll keep tracking every signal.